Egypt, the discovery that Teotihuacan in Mexico and Abu Garab in Egypt were similar places where, as Zechariah Sitchin put it, the Anunnaki may have been making gold of some sort. Both places are similarly laid out, and in Teotihuacan there is an extraordinary intact mass of silica that nobody really understands. William found silica in plates in Abu Garab that apparently nobody has ever found before. And I was thinking, William, do you believe that this material is beginning to appear because people like you are looking for it? Do you think that it's possible that maybe 50 or 100 years ago it couldn't have been found?
I think that's a very interesting perspective, Whitley, because as even von Daniken commented in his article in his magazine about that mica, it was unknown 100 years ago what the potential use for such a substance might be. And as he even notes, to suggest that primitive man knew what this stuff could be used for in terms of its superconductive capabilities, its use as an insulator in high-frequency applications and computer technology, it's absurd to think that they could have had that understanding, unless, as we have suggested so many times, the missing link is a super-advanced race that constructed these places with complete knowledge of the use of this material.
And that locked these places with a certain kind of key that can only be unlocked by those who regain the knowledge that we have lost. And this gets me to sort of the first place I want to go right now, William, which is our shattered memory of the past. Folks, we're going to be talking more about things like Atlantis and the Atlantis connection to Abu Garab and the Atlantis connection to Egypt in general, but in ways you've never heard it talked about before, so do listen on. We're shattered, William, now. We're broken. We don't have everything that was great, it seems, is in ruins. So what happened?
Well, yeah, is this a cyclical cataclysm that periodically wipes out vast numbers of humans while harvesting a small segment? I mean, the Bible infers that that's a possibility. In fact, the Bible suggests that it's going to happen again, and we may even be living in an end time when that harvesting of souls transpires once again, and then perhaps there will be another cataclysm that wipes out or destroys our memory and leaves us ill-equipped to be able to understand what we're looking at when we're dealing with some of these temple sites and other of the artifacts of these previously glorious civilizations.
Because Egyptian religion can be read as ritualized motions, like a cargo cult of the kind that would appear in New Guinea when the American soldier Air Force would land during World War II. The natives, having no idea even what an airplane was, would see this and then would see these men bringing out all kinds of wonderful things from the airplane, and they would invent rituals. They would invent a ritual language connected with this activity. They would build their own runway. They would build bamboo and airplanes with wings made of leaves. They would build little bamboo refrigerators and make sounds and move around them like they saw the American soldiers doing, and open them in hopes that cans of beer would come out, or bottles, I guess, of beer in those days. Egyptian religion, with its highly structured, ritualized behavior, the wearing of all of these strangely shaped objects on the head and body, all of the movements, the temple, the structure of the temples, has the flavor of something like that, to me at least.
Oh, I totally agree. In fact, in my presentations, when I discuss this subject, and indeed in my second presentation while in Egypt, which I called Egyptian Stargate Metaphysics, the Dimension of the Blessed, I show these beautiful paintings of a woman. For the sake of giving her a name, I call her Proud Mary. And Proud Mary is on a craft or on a ship, and she's floating along a river. And to the uninitiated, it looks like, wow, she must be on her boat and she's sailing down the Nile. Not true. It turns out that in the Egyptian mindset, the Nile had a heavenly counterpart. There's a law attributed to Tahuti that says, as above, so below. And so when we see Proud Mary on her craft, she's not sailing down the earthly Nile, she's sailing along the heavenly Nile. And here's where this story gets really wild. I compare the shape of Proud Mary's craft, or her ship that she's sailing in, with the way modern science portrays a wormhole. In fact, I used Professor Stephen Hawking's drawing of a wormhole. And when I put his depiction of a mouth of the wormhole with the throat and then the second mouth beside Proud Mary's craft, you cannot tell the difference between the two drawings. And what I suggest with this is that perhaps the ancient Egyptians had this primordial sacred science, and what they are trying to tell us is that long ago, these beings sailed the stars in craft that we today call stargates or wormholes. And what we are now coming upon is awareness. We have finally developed enough of our capability, our mental capabilities, and indeed probably spiritual capabilities to comprehend what these stories are actually telling us. It's profound.
And it gets even more profound when you think about what Stephen Hawking is now saying about our relationship to the past. He is now saying that the past changes depending on how we look at it. In other words, it may be that the mica wasn't there, wouldn't have been there at all 50 years ago, literally not there, but is there now for you because of the way you are beginning to look at the past. You may be a wormhole, William. You may be one, literally, physically.
Yeah.
You and everybody else who's doing this and doing it right, like Stephen Mailer and Chris Dunn.
Sure, absolutely. I have stated numerous times that I believe that the human body, from the soul's perspective, is a resurrection machine. It is the particle accelerator that scientists say is required to open such a wormhole. And when we begin to look at it from that perspective, maybe that is one of the vibrational adjustments that we make in our spiritual as well as mental being that enables us to find ourselves in the company of other like-minded and like-souled people, like, as I discussed, Ted St. Rain and Anya Nadell, that can help us put together this piece to the puzzle that suddenly unlocks this amazing new avenue of inquiry and knowledge and affirms that, hey, this stuff is real. I mean, what Sitchin is talking about, here's where the rubber meets the road. This is one of the actual sites, and it's just incredibly exciting to be a part of this right now, and I can't wait to see where it goes, to be perfectly honest with you.
I once asked this gentleman who used to meditate with me, I refer to him more and more often lately because it's, I think, becoming more and more important to do so, who came with a number of others for quite a few years to my old cabin in upstate New York. What was the most important thing I could know? To which his response was, not in words, but this is what it meant. Live, hate, soul starves. Live, love, soul thrives. Essentially, this process is going on right now, and a decision is being made, I think, by many, many souls, and this has been true for some time, a kind of final decision about what they will do and be, and or not be, because I think that it isn't that the evil go to hell. I think it is that the evil just don't go. They just sort of disappear. I have a feeling that they kind of wither away and die and blow away like a sort of dust. Is that
sort of like a reverse rapture, in other words?
Yeah, well, there's going to be a rapture, all right, but the meek are going to turn out to inherit the earth, and of course, then they're going to have to roll up their sleeves and fix the darn thing, but that's fine. That'll be one of the greatest acts of love in the history of humanity.
There you go. Right,
yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly. To repair the past. Let's get back to the past a little bit, because the past does not anymore seem to be fixed. It's malleable. And I have a feeling that one of the reasons that it's being so carefully hidden from us is that someone does not want us to find a certain past. They want us to find the past that's most important to us of a whole vast array of pasts that we could find. How does that resonate with you? The idea that there might be someone, the Anunnaki, someone who is actually here now among us and who is moving people like you through the world. Do you feel any sense of that at all?
I definitely feel a sense of guidance. I can't put a name or a face on it. I call it synchronicity, but I just feel that, I have to trust that I do have this sense of guidance and am being guided in a positive way that will ultimately lead to the revelation that I'm looking for. I, along the way, have encountered resistance. I mean, it's just to be expected. And the way that I interpret resistance is that, wow, I must be getting close. I must be on the right path, because otherwise, why would I be in some of these situations where all of a sudden, unexpectedly, people that you think are normal people under normal circumstances suddenly begin displaying utterly bizarre behavior that is meant to distract you and put you off your path. I mean, I can definitely say that goes on as well. So, to answer your question, yeah, I feel that sense of guidance and continue to try to just stay tuned to it and to follow it, because it is, to me, eminently positive.
Now, there is a temple in Egypt, which I suspect that you've seen, where there are supposedly figures of modern technology painted on the rafters at the top of the temple. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with this?
You must be. I believe you're talking about the temple at Abydos.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Have you seen them?
Several times, yes, absolutely. It's one of my all-time favorite places in Egypt. Spent a lot of time studying Abydos. What
do you make of them? Describe them first, if you will, for those who are not familiar with this.
I believe that what you're talking about is the hieroglyphs that appear to form what look like Black Hawk helicopters,
and a Russian tank, and a
Russian.
Another type of big Russian helicopter, yeah.
Right. And there's two schools of thought on it. One, that it actually does portray this advanced technology. Another take that's been developed for several years now is that, in fact, that it's the superimposition of two hieroglyphs that appears to make that connection. Either way, when you stand in front of it, as I have, it does clearly look like you're looking at a helicopter and you're looking at a tank. And however it happens, that is the outcome. And I would cite that as another example of coincidence, or we might even call it divine mind that is operated, whether it's a form of hypnosis that you believe you're going to see that, therefore you do, or perhaps somehow this hieroglyph, this etching on this wall is in fact somehow morphing itself into this figure that looks like the tank and the helicopter. And what that ultimately is designed to do, I would say, is to ask you to consider, hey, is it possible the ancients had this kind of advanced technology? And I believe it's entirely possible that they did, because at Abydos is where you find this incredible shrine of Osiris. And inside the Shrine of Osiris is where we find this pillar that I've been studying for well over a decade that shows what the Egyptians called an enlightenment pillar attached to what the Israelites called the Ark of the Covenant. What is most significant about that is not that it portrays what is clearly some form of advanced technology, and also the statements made by the Egyptians inform us that it was some form of a device, but the location of Abydos itself. It's located immediately adjacent to a temple called the Osirian. What do you see at the Osirian? You see these massive, I'm talking 200-ton plus red granite blocks.
You know, William, I would like to just stop for a moment. First of all, folks, I have no idea whether or not we've even taken a break, and frankly, I don't care, because this is so fascinating. We'll just go on to whatever the next break is. And if we took one back a while ago, a few minutes ago, fine. I'm so enthralled by this, but I just want to interrupt you for 1 second, William, to say the Osirian is, I feel it's enormously important. I just have an instinct about that. But go ahead, please.
Yeah, it is, Whitley. Your instinct is entirely correct. if you talk with John Anthony West, you talk with Stephen Mailer, you talk with Chris Dunn, you're looking at a temple that is conservatively aged or dated at least 12,000 years ago. You see these incredible giant red granite blocks that were moved around like we would move Lego blocks. And the dating on it is suggested by a complementary temple that sits beside the Sphinx called the Valley Temple. It's believed that the Valley Temple, like the Sphinx, is dated to at least 10,000 BC, and that's based, of course, on the water erosion of the Sphinx. So what we're dealing with here in the Osirian is this vastly ancient temple. And what I believe happened is that the Temple of Abydos was located where it was because the Pharaoh, Seti, who made the temple at Abydos, had also made or identified the temple of Osiris, the Osirian, and was perhaps privy to whatever ancient technology was actually housed at that place.
It seems to me that there was ancient technology, and this gets us inevitably back to the idea of Atlantis, and we're going to be talking about that, and the thing such as the Edfu texts and what it may mean and what may have happened. Because if we go back into the distant past, we begin to see things very extraordinary and strange things, like Nan Madol in the Pacific, which I don't believe you've been to, William. It's very isolated and out of the way. These strange structures that are found all around the world that can't be explained. Sacsayhuaman in Peru, which, have you been there?
Not yet.
No. Okay. And such places where the engineering cannot be explained. The great platform at Baalbek in Lebanon, which I doubt very much you've been to because it's so hard to get into now because of all of the presence of the Hezbollah around it and so forth, using it as a garbage dump, apparently. So, anyway, that's neither here nor there, I guess. All of these things, these extraordinary engineering achievements of the distant past that are beyond our ability to duplicate now, including, for that matter, the Giza Pyramid. What happened? Or even the wonderful little carved vases and so forth from the very earliest times in Egypt that are made of, I believe, of dolomite and that seem to have been carved inside and out using some kind of a machine tool. Remarkable stuff. And yet, there is a huge difference between the quality of their engineering and what we see in terms of the archaeological remains of the way the people around these places were living at that time. What sense is there then, William? What should we think?
Well, I think we have to begin to open ourselves to the possibility, as did the great Egyptologist Flinders Petrie, that there was a super race in antiquity. That they call this the dynastic race theory, and it alleges that before 3200 BC or 3100 BC, with the founding of Egypt, there was a technologically superior group of, he calls them elite foreigners, who he thinks originally came from Mesopotamia or ancient Iraq and settled Egypt. And we account for the disparity between the cultures there, those that built these structures and those that perhaps served those who built them, by understanding that we are dealing with a couple of different races here. The race that built these temples we think of as the gods of the past. These are the Anunnaki, who were inheritors of an ancient wisdom and viewed humankind as their servants. And in many ways, a very positive way did they view us as their servants, because they, in fact, in the earliest religious traditions, built these temples not as places of worship, but as places where humankind could come to work for the gods. The work that we did for the gods in these temples and these workshops was alchemy. We learned to become gods ourselves. But then something, as we were talking, happened, and now a priesthood comes in and disavows our connection with those gods and tells us that no, we can't ourselves become gods, even though we know that that's not true. And so here we are now coming upon the scene and looking at this evidence and trying to find, where did these gods go? Where is this knowledge? And the answer is that knowledge is still there. We can connect with it just by going to these places.
The reason that I started this conversation with the story of the soul and the thriving of the soul in love and the death of the soul in hate now emerges in pretty much exactly the way I thought it would. And that is this priesthood of which you speak. It starts 3,000 years ago at least by saying that we cannot reach this state. Then, at the time of the coming of Pisces, it encloses us further by saying not only can we not reach this state, but we are actually born evil. We are born in darkness. That mankind is dark, that we are born with so-called original sin, and that our mothers are and wives who are the source of the human body and the source of pleasure are in some way intrinsically evil for that reason. In other words, they take us down farther yet away from the light and the true energy that governs this universe, and this planet gets a little dimmer each time. Now, what do you think is the most important thing that we could go back to find out a way to bring back the light? Now, I'm going to leave that question for the break. We'll be right back. This is Dreamland. We're talking to William Henry. William Henry's website, williamhenry.net. His great new DVDs available in the unknowncountry.com store. Journey with him to Egypt right in your own home. An extraordinary, marvelous journey, beautifully produced as always with William's DVDs. Take it from me, Annie and I have seen them, and they are really wonderful. They almost make you jump out of your chair. The ideas are so exciting. William, what do we need to do? What is the single most important thing that each of us can do to try to restore the light?
Well, I think that the bedrock Christian notion to me comes from a quote. It's from the book of Philippians, and it says, our homeland is in the heavens. That's where we expect our Savior to come from, who will transform our humble bodies so as to resemble His glorious body. And by means of the power which He has to subdue the entire universe, this is how we're going to transform ourselves. And by that I mean we're not looking for a short-bearded Jewish guy to come along and tell us, hey, this is the way to salvation. What we're looking for is a teaching, an understanding that encoded within our DNA is the capability of transforming our humble bodies into glorious bodies of light. And we begin by recognizing that this planet is not our home. We come from the stars. We are star beings. And what we have to begin to learn how to do is to connect with the glorious energies of the stars, and that is going to begin to affect this transformation of our individual bodies into these glorious bodies. This is why I think so many of the ancient pharaohs, the Buddhas, and others were portrayed as golden beings, because that is the end process of the alchemical transformation, the transformation or transmutation of an impure metal into gold, or an impure soul into a golden one, a golden being. And that is, to me, the core, that's the power pack that's going to drive this transformation.
This transformation is essential for a very interesting reason. It's essential because of the earth. I mean, we speak about ascending in a sense away from the earth, and yet it is the earth that depends on us and which we depend on for our life. Without the earth, there will be no ascension because there's nobody left to rise. So it's really a two-edged sword in a way, as above, so below. If we rise into heaven, we must also descend into and purify and make healthy again the earth. Is that or is that just nonsense? I don't know.
No, I totally agree with that, Whitley. In fact, the Egyptologist E.A. Wally Budge, who was a famous Egyptologist at the turn of the 20th century at the British Museum, described the feats, the earthly feats that these ascended beings are capable of performing, and it includes healing the sick, returning the dead to life, clothing their followers in this incorruptible or light body, as I'm describing, weather control, manipulation of matter. They can predict the future. They can alter the past and the future. These are tremendously powerful beings, and from the list I just described, you can understand why the U.S. military would not want an individual to acquire these powers. And why the U.S. government would feel the same way.
Right. Any power that the individual acquires, as far as the U.S. government is concerned, is bad. I mean, they want the individual to be completely disempowered. I mean, if you asked an individual member of the National Security Agency or someone who worked in the White House, they would tell you the opposite. Of course, we want empowerment for the individual, but in fact, the way they act is they gather everything behind the walls of secrecy that may affect the balance of government. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're talking to William Henry, his website, williamhenry.net. Don't miss William Henry's lectures. He travels all over the country. Go to his website to find out what they are, williamhenry.net. Plus, his beautiful new DVDs and all of his other books and works are available from the unknowncountry.com store. Let's now, William, turn to something slightly different. The building texts and the remarkable story that they tell.
Yeah, absolutely amazing story, Whitley. The building texts are found at a temple called the Temple of Edfu, which is down the Nile, built around 237 BC and completed around 60 BC. And according to the legends carved on its stone walls, the current temple replaced an older structure that had been designed according to a divine plan that dropped down from heaven to earth. And what we find at this temple is a story that's absolutely astonishing. And one of my sources for this is Dr. Yves Raymond, who wrote a book called The Mythical Origin of the Egyptian Temple in the 1960s. And she says that these Edfu texts, or building texts as they're also known, contain cosmological records. And these records begin with a time when the gods or divine beings originally came down to earth. And they tell us that these divine beings created a sacred island that was surrounded by primeval water. They called this island the Island of the Egg. And by the edge of this island was a lake that they called, or was a field of reeds that was beside this lake, which harkens back to Teotihuacan, which is also called the place of reeds. Very interesting connection. And these Edfu texts then go on to tell us that a group of divine powers came to this place. These mysterious beings were led by a group of individuals that they called the Falcons or the Sages. And they began to build civilization at this place. And if you begin to listen to this story right away, you're thinking an island surrounded by water, divine beings. That sounds an awful lot like the story of Atlantis. And in fact, I believe that these Edfu texts, the building texts, are the source material for the story of Atlantis, which, to refresh everyone's memory, Plato's story came from Egypt. It tells of gods or divine beings who came from the stars, who created a hybrid race of humans that had superpowers, whose powers and divine essence, as Plato described it, diminished over time. Zeus, living in the center of the universe, was in communication with these beings through mental telepathy, caught wind that humankind's ability had degenerated, and sent his wrath. And that's where Plato's story leaves off. And it's clear that we're probably talking about the exact same story, the building text and also Plato's story of Atlantis.
William, it's very interesting. You mentioned the just in passing, the falcon. And I wonder what the connection is between and Horus, who is the sages or falcons. Horus was, of course, I think the first of the royal gods, or the earliest anyway that we know about. Could you tell me if there's any relationship between those?
Great question, Whitley. In fact, let me now finish the story that the Edfu texts tell us. They say that these falcon beings or sages came to this island of the egg, and then they tell us that there was a battle with an enemy serpent that brought to close the first period of creation. And these original falcon beings, these sages, fought this serpent, which they called the Great Leaping One. And they fought it with a weapon that the Edfu texts describe only as the sound eye, which emerges from the island and created devastation. Now, Yves Raymond believed that the sound eye was the center of the light that illumined this island of creation, or the island of the egg. After this conflict with the Great Leaping One, the island vanished beneath the waters of Nun, or the waters of creation, as the Egyptians referred to them. A second generation of creators then emerged, and among these was a new special group who were described as the eldest ones, who then immortalized the falcons as the ancestors of this first occasion. Later, we're told that, according to the Edfu text, that a second generation of sages came along, and they began to create this new revelation, this new civilization, and only much, much later were they replaced by the Horus kings that also adopted the falcon as their symbol. Now, the interesting thing about this is that the Edfu texts conclude by telling us that the divine sages, the original falcons, were replaced by a group of beings called the Shemsu Hor, who were the pre-dynastic ancestors of the Egyptians who were led by Horus. According to the Royal Papyrus of Turin, the records of this papyrus tell us that the reign of the Shemsu Hor stretches to a remote 40,000 years. And according to Robert Bauval, these kings lists call the Shemsu Hor the transfigured spirits, or light beings. So it appears that what we're talking about here is a group of light beings, formless beings that came from the stars, who were originally called falcons or sages, and who, after what seems to be an impossible 40,000 years, were then replaced around 3100 BC by the first Horus kings who founded Egyptian civilization, according to Egyptology, and also adopted the falcon as their totem or as their symbol. And now we know why.
You know, William, when you were describing these generational changes, it occurred to me that what you could be telling us about, or telling us, is a story, an attempt on the part of somebody who did not really understand anything about genetics to describe the effects of a series of genetic manipulations and the different types of person who emerged generation by generation during the process of manipulation. You could have just as easily been talking about the creation of the human race.
Yeah, isn't that incredible? And this is why I'm so excited to talk with you about this, because you've obviously got an incredible intuitive grasp of this, but also with Andrew Collins, who has also written about this, and I think is going to share the same opinion that we have. And so in the subscriber interview with Andrew, we're going to get into this in more detail from his perspective and try and bring out some of the what I would say is his non-public or secret research in this area that I know he has talked about that he's been doing but has yet to reveal publicly. So this is exactly what we're talking about, I think, is a succession of races, a perfection of the races. It very interestingly dovetails with Zecharia Sitchin's theories concerning the Anunnaki, in particular the being called Enki or Ea, who Sitchin suggests or attributes all these incredible genetic capabilities to. What is Enki's symbol? Well, when you see Enki in numerous depictions in ancient Sumeria, he has a gyre falcon in his hand. It suggests that Enki and the Anunnaki were also part of this bird tribe or falcon tribe. And most fascinatingly to me, I had a really interesting conversation with a gentleman named Father Charlie Moore, who's one of Zechariah Sitchin's best friends and is a tremendous supporter of his work, and who I also hope to interview here on Dreamland soon because he's got a book coming out. And I asked Father Charlie about that. I said, what do you make of Enki holding the gyre falcon in his hand? Is it because he's connected with these falcon beings that go back into 40,000 years or more into antiquity and ancient Egyptian legend? And he said, well, that's very, very possible. But also, look at the word gyre, the gyre falcon. The word gyre is found in our words such as gyroscope. And it suggested to Father Charlie that maybe these falcon beings were also traveling in some sort of a vortex that also has that same gyre motion. Interesting line of speculation, but we have to answer the question, how did these light beings originally come to Earth? Well, at Abu Garab, in the legend there, it says that they were divine beings composed of sacred energy, light, who came through what we today describe as a stargate or a vortex at Abu Garab and set about creating humankind and established the original mound of creation. These stories really start to dovetail in such an interesting way that you just get the sense that we're starting to really put some concrete evidence behind these stories, and wow, it's tremendously exciting.
Folks, let me leave you with a thought. We're going to take a little break right now, and I'm just going to leave you with a little thought. Based on what you have just heard, think about the little balls of light, the orbs that you're beginning to see more and more often these days, and in particular in England, forming the crop circles. What might they really be doing? Could it be that they are doing something similar to what was done in the past? And would that explain some of the extraordinary children that are being born right now? We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're talking to William Henry, and he will be talking in the subscriber section to Andrew Collins about these extraordinary subjects. He's going to be going in deep into some secret stuff then. And when I say secret, what I mean is this. People who are working in this particular mine, people like William and Chris Dunn, Collins, the Stephen Mailer, the others, they don't keep secrets. They don't hide things from you. They keep things secret until they understand how to talk about them. Then they start talking. We're not about hiding things from anybody. None of us are. That's very important that you understand that. When we say secret, we usually mean that we are trying to overturn the secrets being kept by others, and we're certainly not keeping any of our own. Now, I would like to go on a little bit with the falcon god and the falcon imagery because, of course, the wings of an eagle, very closely related to the falcon, are an integral part of the Sphinx. These are the wings that spread, and I'll just tell you briefly the one of those riddles of the Sphinx. What has the intelligence of a man, the courage of a lion, the strength of a bull, and the wings of an eagle that enable it to fly above life? That is a superman, such as we are talking about, such as we must become and can become. William, do you think there's any relationship between the Sphinx and the falcon, or am I just talking through my hat?
No, I think there's a definite connection, Whitley, and the connection is made by another piece of information provided by the Edfu text. They tell us that these falcons or sages possessed power relics, or relics, shall we say. That's the term that Dr. Yves Raymond uses. And they tell us that after the cataclysm, these sages or falcons who survived the cataclysm retrieved this relic, which is a jed pillar that was located in the field of reeds. It's very interesting to me that they also go on to... I'm sorry?
Do you think that we're talking now about some of the tools that must have been used to build, to create things like the vases and so forth we were speaking about earlier? Or what are you talking about exactly?
I think with the Jed pillar, we're talking about a power pillar. The Jed pillar is what we see, for example, in the crypt at Dendera. It has a pillar with 4 notches or levels on it that appears to be supporting what might be described as a light bulb or as a cathode ray tube or as a Crookes tube, depending upon your perspective. It's a symbol of illumination at Dendera and has numerous capabilities. And it is in every way, shape, and form this power relic that they're describing. The Edfu texts tell us that the Falcons were instructed to enter an enigmatic place called Place in which the things of the earth were filled with power. Let me repeat that. They were instructed to go to this place called Place in which the things of the earth were filled with power. What place are we talking about? Are we talking about perhaps the Hall of Records beneath the Sphinx, where the ancient relics or power tools were believed to have been stored? There's good evidence that various figures throughout Egyptian history, including Tutmosis IV, Tutmosis III, Akhenaten, and possibly even Tutankhamun, had access to this Hall of Records and maybe even had access to the power relics that were stored in this enigmatic place. I think that that's what we're dealing with here, and that would be the connection with the Sphinx. And whether or not those power relics are still there or not, it's hard to say for sure. But one thing I do want to mention in this context is this notation in the Edfu text that the Jed pillar was also located in the field of reeds. That harkens back to Teotihuacan once again. But now we can add an even more interesting layer to this, a tidbit of information that I first came upon in Lawrence Gardner's book, Lost Secrets of the Sacred Art. He notes that this field of reeds, as it's called, was also known as the field of the blessed. The field of the blessed. And what I've begun doing is looking at this and saying, is it possible that this field that we're describing is actually a dimension? What if it's a plane? What if this field or dimension of the blessed is this field or sea of intelligent energy that we're told permeates all of creation, in fact, is creation, is the conscious energy that is creation? Is it possible that this power relic, this device, was somehow tapping the quantum energy of the universe itself, and that these light beings were utilizing this in order to manifest civilization on this plane or in this field or this dimension that we presently inhabit?
I get the impression that the work that suddenly stopped a few years ago around the Sphinx might have found something, as we discussed last week just very briefly. Indeed, it might have been these tools, in which case the Egyptian government, closely allied with the United States, would have immediately acted to bring in scientists to try to understand these tools. They may never be able to do that, or not to understand them in a correct way, because without love, without the combination, you can't unlock the door, would be my guess.
Really, I think you absolutely must. I don't know. You have just nailed it, in my opinion, because according to the Egyptian tradition, recorded in the Egyptian Book of the Dead and elsewhere, only souls which weighed less than Mot, the symbol for truth, which was symbolically represented as a feather, were allowed to start the long and perilous journey to the blessed field, to the field of the blessed. And what did Jesus say about those with the blessed heart? They would see God. So I believe you're absolutely right that only the light-hearted, or those with the eye of light, and again, Jesus made that enigmatic reference to those whose eye is single will be filled with light or filled with love. They are the only ones who can access this technology. And I don't see how it's possible that some of the people that we've been describing within the various governmental agencies have that energy or that vibration about themselves. They are not trying to approach this with love. They are not coming from the power of love. They are coming from the perspective of the love of power. and it's not going to work for them.
That's beautifully said, William, and it's also why the average abductee knows far more about the visitors and their reasons for being here and the dangers and the opportunities that involves than the government does with all of its hidden and secret knowledge, most of which is useless because it has been hidden. To hide it is to destroy it, because you hide it in hate. You reveal it in love, always. That is indisputable. You know, when you were talking about the lightness of being, I was thinking about Anne's experience in the world of the dead when she was in this big room and everyone was loaded down with luggage. And it was a place where apparently they were having trouble giving up their baggage. And
that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, one of the images that I used in my second lecture, the Egyptian Stargate Metaphysics lecture, comes from the Book of the Dead, and it shows another figure on a craft. And I use that word craft intentionally once again because of its double meaning. A craft is a ship, but the craft is alchemy, and that is what is required in order to achieve this lightness of heart. So they portray this figure on the craft sailing into a net, or what I think is a symbol for a field, the field or dimension of the blessed. This figure has a feather sitting on his knee, indicating that he has achieved this lightness of heart, the eye of light that is required in order to sail into the dimension of the blessed. And I use that term sail into, but really the dimension of the blessed is all there is. We are already in it. We just simply can't see it, feel it, or otherwise experience it because of the baggage that you're describing.
Now, exactly, and speaking of baggage, folks, William has alluded a couple of times to early Egyptologists who believed that the Egyptian writings were referring to a super race that had existed before mankind. This was commonly accepted until the Nazis came along, and any talk of a super race came to seem terribly dangerous. And now Egyptologists don't talk about those texts anymore, at least not in that context, but the meaning remains the same. It hasn't changed, has it?
No, not one bit, and that's what's so disastrous about this present situation, that in trying to be sensitive to political correctness, all of a sudden we cut ourselves off from the essential core of Egyptian religion, but not only Egyptian religion, but also early Gnostic Christianity. The original Christian message was all about recovering the secrets of this robe of glory, this garment of light, and how to make yourself light as a feather, and have this lightness of heart, the eye of light that will enable you to return to the place whence we came, the stars. And so you see what a prison-like quality all of this is taking on all of a sudden, and you definitely get the impression that it's an intentional suppression. It's designed to keep us on this realm for whatever reason. And of course, as we've talked with John Lash and others, we have definite thoughts about why they wish to keep us in this dark place.
Well, why don't you expand a little bit on your views of that?
Well, I certainly concur with the early Gnostic view that these archons, these rulers, as they're also described in the Nag Hammadi library, are a race of predatory beings who harvest negative energy from the human body. They utilize it as a form of a food. It's sort of like it's been described as intergalactic crack, where fear doesn't exist elsewhere in the universe. These archons are able to harvest this energy and sell it like crack in other planets, other realms where fear and hate does not exist. And so what we are challenged by is a situation in which the world's major religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and to some extent Buddhism, are all set up to get into crossfire situations with one another, to generate conflict, petty jealousies between the religions that continually keep humanity enfolded in a realm of hatred for one another, jealousy over each other's gods or divine beings, and in a situation in which we continually to go in circles, reincarnating, or as I like to say, reincarcerating on this planet with no hope for parole, unless we can connect with the original teachings and the original stories. But again, as we've been discussing, there are so many authorities on this realm that are seeking to withhold that knowledge from us.
And yet they can't. It's interesting that you can connect with it like I have. I mean, I don't have any secret access to any texts or anything like that, but I know very well what this is about, and so do you. You can too. I mean, not just William, but you folks listen to the show. You're here in order to reconnect. That's why you're here. That's why you're listening to this complicated, unlikely radio program that only exists on the internet, that you have to go to the trouble of downloading or listening online or something, and you don't go away because you're going to do this. You're the ones who are going to connect. The meek shall inherit the earth. Hello, meek. Guess who you are? Here you are. So that's kind of where we are right now. I think that we're going to stretch this to just a couple of more minutes, because I just want to talk a little bit about, and William, you're going to have about 3 or 4 minutes to do this. So best of luck. Aztlan was the ancestral home of the Aztecs, a great mountain in the middle of the water, perhaps where, William?
Well, according to ideas that have been proposed lately, we may be talking about Aztlan as existing in the southwestern states of California, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, portions of Nevada, Utah, and Colorado.
So what happens then if it reappears?
It appears to be the fulfillment of the prophecy of the return of Aztlan, Atlan, or Atlantis, and the return of the empire of Atlantis itself.
And is it that the land literally breaks up and this reappears, or is it that the people living in this area, or some of the people, reconnect with this past, and a kind of bolt of energy crosses the vast gulf of time involved, and suddenly the people of Aztlan have recovered themselves and are reestablishing their own empire again? Is that possible too?
That's what's happening, and I was first tipped off to this. I was watching Hannity and Combs of all shows, and not Sean Hannity, Alan Combs all of a sudden says that what animates or drives the whole Mexican immigration wave is the dream of Aztlan and the recreation of the nation of Aztlan. And of course, Alan Combs had no clue what that was, but I readily recognized what that is. And as I start to look into it further, there is this prophetic aspect of it. You find a very dark and dangerous aspect of it because they talk about the recreation of the nation of Aztlan as occurring through a democratic form. In other words, masses of people moving into this area and beginning to establish themselves as a voting bloc. There are others that say that the only way the nation of Aztlan can return is through armed conflict with the aggressor nation, which in this case is the United States. Either way, this recreation of the nation of Aztlan is the fulfillment of a prophecy. In fact, one of the persons who's commented on this in an interesting way, and he did so in 1977, is Dr. J.J. Hertog in his book, The Keys of Enoch. In that book, he shows a map of 12 sacred sites that ring the planet, that include the Giza Plateau. It also includes other areas, and Dr. Hertog says that at the time of this transition, which we're undergoing right now, there will be two areas of light that will be reformed. One in the southwestern quadrant of the U.S., precisely corresponding with where the nation of Aztlan is seeking to reformulate itself, and a second location in the southeastern quadrant of the United States, centered in Nashville, Tennessee. So, according to that,
where you are trying to reform yourself,
where I am,
indeed.
Where I am noting the astonishing recreation of ancient temple sites for some seemingly unapparent reason, but I think it corresponds with this thought that Hertog has put forward, channeled through the prophet Enoch, that at this time there will be these two new centers that will be reformed, and here we are watching this unfold right before our very eyes. And I'm not saying that I agree or disagree with this Nation of Aztlan movement of the recreation of Aztlan, Atlan, or Atlantis in California, Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado, but I am observing that this is what is motivating this whole immigration issue. This is what's behind it, and it is, I believe, indeed prophetic.
Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life's star, hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar. Not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory, do we come from God who is our home, said William Wordsworth in an inspired moment in the mid-19th century. This has been Dreamland with Whitley Strieber and William Henry discussing for the second week his extraordinary journeys through Egypt. Next up, Linda Moulton Howe. And for our subscribers, William Henry and Andrew Collins. Don't miss it. You're about to experience something that you just can't get elsewhere. Emmy Award-winning science reporter Linda Moulton Howe reporting on the absolute leading edge of science, discovery, and the true mysteries of the unknown. Don't miss her website, earthfiles.com, the one science website that tells you the secrets and gives you the facts others dare not. earthfiles.com. This week she's reporting on a cattle mutilation, rather a mutilation of a horse in Colorado, going back to that, and then an incredible report from the island of Grenada. Remember that invasion in 1983? Well, it turns out there was a UFO crash recovery covered by the invasion. Here she is from Albuquerque, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. Yes, first there is sad news from Fort Lupton, Colorado this week that on Tuesday, May 16th, a 15-year-old mare was found dead and, quote, cut up with surgical precision, unquote, according to the owner, Kelly Conrado. He said that someone, quote, took all her female parts, then cut out her heart and cut off her ears, unquote. He said it was bizarre that there was virtually no blood around her body, and the horse had given birth to her first colt only 2 weeks ago. And now the owners have had to find a mare that hopefully will adopt this young colt and keep it alive. The mutilated horse's body has been taken to Colorado State University, where it will be examined by a pathologist, and I'll try to stay on top of this story, and whenever there are results, I'll report them at Earth Files and Dreamland. Now, let's go back 23 years ago. Under orders of President Ronald Reagan, American helicopters landed at Pearls Airport in northeastern Grenada at 5 o'clock in the morning on October 25th, 1983. Fidel Castro's Cuban People's Revolutionary Army fired at the U.S. Marines with small arms and machine guns. To the southwest in Point Salinas, Army Rangers parachuted low from 500 feet onto that airfield around sunrise and were attacked by heavy anti-aircraft fire. The Marines and Rangers would prevail over the Cuban revolutionaries and the Soviet weapons. But before the shooting had begun, the Rangers had evacuated down at Point Salinas the American students from the St. George's Medical Center, and they were flown back to the United States in a huge C-141 transport plane. That Grenada invasion by U.S. Army and Marines from October 23rd to November 21st, 1983, had allegedly been requested by 6 neighboring islands where government authorities were nervous and they wanted President Ronald Reagan's help, because Castro was building a long runway on Grenada for military operations. U.S. officials were afraid that the nearly 10,000-foot-long airport would be big enough to land long-range Soviet bombers, and then from there, Castro and his Soviet allies could work into Central and South America and maybe even launch against the United States. U.S. News and World Report said in its November 7, 1983 edition, quote, secrecy surrounding this operation was almost total. While congressional leaders were informed on the eve of the mission, they were not told when it would be launched, and they were not asked to approve the mission. Not even the White House press office was informed. Reporters were not permitted to accompany U.S. forces to Grenada, and those already there were quickly ordered out. Journalists were allowed on the island only on the third day, unquote. A month later, the American invasion of Grenada was over on November 21, 1983, and the casualties were 19 dead U.S. soldiers, 116 wounded, 29 dead Cuban soldiers, and 49 dead Grenada residents, along with several hundred others wounded. Now I have a military source who says more was happening during that Grenada invasion than anyone knew then or now. There was a top-secret UFO crash retrieval covered up by the top-secret invasion. And the location for this retrieval was in the northeast near the Pearls Airport. Dwayne Britnell, now 58 years old, was drafted into the U.S. Army in January of 1969, where he worked for 23 years until his retirement on September 1st of 1992. During the October 1983 Grenada invasion, Dwayne was a staff officer of the 1st Corps Support Command at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, working in security operations, training, and intelligence. COSCOM, as it's known, was a 5,000-man unit that supported the 18th Airborne Corps in Fort Bragg. That morning of the invasion of Grenada, he had been working a 12-hour emergency shift.
Our job was to occupy and defend Point Salinas, which was the airstrip on the southwestern tip of the island.
And what were you told was the reason for this operation in Grenada?
Well, I was told, of course, it was political. Everything in the news at that time was that we were protecting some college students that were American college students on the island. But, of course, that was a smokescreen because the real reason was that our intelligence picked up that the Cubans were expanding the runway so that the Russian military aircraft could land there and bring nuclear missiles within a range of continental United States. And, of course, President Reagan said, no, that's a no-go, put a stop to it. And so that's why we invaded and killed the Cubans.
Now, what was it that you learned later on, and how did you learn that even yet another secret was being covered up in the Grenada operation?
Well, if you look at the map, there's visibly two airstrips on the island of Grenada, one on the northern northeast side, and then the Point Salinas on the southwestern side. And I can verify that from my experience in running the operation, that the northern airstrip had been declared a no-fly zone. And I never could figure it out, and I just kind of blew it off until later this kid that was in the Air Force told me the story of what was going on and what transpired in extracting a UFO off of the island.
Can you tell us what he told you?
Let me give you a little background. The runway was so short at Point Salinas that everything we flew down there, we flew, and I can verify that because I went to many staff meetings with our ACFS trans. We flew everything, most everything by C-141 to the island of Barbados. And we have an Air Force base there. And so this is where the young man, the young airman, told me the story that he was stationed there at the air base, and everything was flown into Barbados and then offloaded off of the C-141s and refigured for C-130 transport because they were the only ones that could land safely at the short runway at Point Salinas. So that's how my wife knew this, his wife, through the base veterinarian office, and they were visiting our house one Sunday afternoon, and then he told me the story of what actually happened that he personally witnessed.
Which was?
Well, he said a C-5A flew onto the airstrip at Barbados, and it was an Air Force. It was piloted by an Air Force one-star general and crew, and they got off. And the general said, "I need 2 volunteers for the night. Me and my crew has got to take crew rest, and I want one inside the aircraft and one outside, walking around the aircraft to secure it overnight." And so he said that he was assigned the inside duties, and having flown on a C-5A from Korea in my career, I know how it's configured, and everything he told me matched up. All the passengers are in the rear of the plane facing backwards, and there's a huge long ladder that goes down to the flooring down in the aircraft. So he said in the middle of the night he got curious as to what the cargo was, and he started down the ladder with his flashlight, and that's when he saw it. He says, "That's the god-awfulest thing I'd ever seen in my life." Obviously it scared him on many levels, but it was probably overgrown with growth, having been in the jungle up there on that airstrip for so long. And he I don't know how to put this, basically said he wet his pants and went back up into the passenger compartment, but he drew me a map. This is how detailed he drew a map on my dining room table, not a map, but a sketch of this craft. And of course he didn't approach it. He was too scared once he realized what it was. And of course he didn't know what was in it either, and I don't either, whether there were actual alien bodies or anything like that. I really don't know. However, the way the story went, the next morning the general came out and relieved him, and they took off to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And so my knowledge of why they chose a C-5A is because C-5A is known for its capability of short takeoff and landing. And of course that airstrip was very short up there. And I also verified with a buddy of mine that I had known in the Army who was a pilot, and he fought in a helicopter. I called him a couple of years ago, and he verified that the terrain up on that northeast, the cliffs are like several hundred feet, just straight drop-off, solid rock. And there was a V in the rock that you had to go through to drop down, so it would be very difficult to get an aircraft to land on that airstrip. But he said the natives had dug out bunkers in the side of that rock to defend the airstrip, and it might explain that they either shot it down or it was disabled and landed there.
And it would fit into a C-5?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it obviously was, C-5s are huge now, but this obviously was not what we term mothership, but a smaller craft. And he said it fit in there fine. Another comment he made was that prior to coming to Pope Air Force Base, that he was stationed up at Wright-Patterson, and he knew for a fact up there's 2 runways, and one of them is never used for traffic, and off to the side there is a huge building, environmentally controlled, because it's got, all the air conditioners and stuff out on top, which makes sense to house bodies and I also got that verified on a TV show on Sci-Fi Channel that there were scientists who worked off base that had a tunnel and went up elevators into that facility on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Did they have to get machetes, or what did they use to chop this disc out of the jungle?
A combination of cranes or forklifts, and probably they carried some MHE, material handling equipment, capable of lifting it and putting it on the craft. Probably carried it down with them, and the crew maybe loaded it up, or they got units on the ground to assist. He was a young airman, Air Force Security Police on the island of Barbados. So he wasn't there when they loaded it. He was only there to secure it on Barbados when they took crew rest.
So they flew from Grenada to Barbados?
Right.
And then they went on to Wright-Patterson?
Right.
So he never saw it in the jungle?
No.
So what was it that he was afraid of?
The reason I said that is because he drew on the sketch that he drew for me, he drew vines all over it, and as if they didn't bother to take the vines off, just cut them away and then picked it up. Just on the bottom, and even kind of went up and into a point at the top. Kind of like a top.
Okay.
You know how one of these little tops you spin,
right.
A spinning top?
Right.
That's pretty much the size, the shape of it.
And he drew it with the vines from northern Grenada all over it, as if they had chopped it out and then loaded it on the C-5 to go back to Wright-Patterson without taking any of the vines off.
Right. Now, an interesting point. One time, the Prime Minister of Grenada, through the United Nations, had made a call for open and public investigation, and that the international community ousted him from his position. They forced him out because he wanted to go public with because of his probably, and so that fit together his prior knowledge of the physical presence of a UFO on his island. He knew that they existed, and so he wanted to get other people to help and participate.
Did your Air Force source say that any of his superior officers or anyone else talked about our government or some government shooting this disc down on Grenada?
No. It was kind of a closed thing. I'm sure the general told him, as most people are told, that, hey, you didn't see anything here. You understand? If you want a career in the Air Force, you never say anything about this.
But the suggestion was between him to you that we might have shot it down?
Oh, not us. It had no telling how long that thing had been there prior to our invasion of the island. I have no idea how old it was or how long it had been there. But my only suggestion is that because it was overgrown in vines, that it had been there for quite some time.
Did your source ever get any more information from any work in relationship to what Wright-Patterson found?
No. We were 6 months after the operation had ended, and he went his way and I went mine, and, finding sources of information like that are few and far in between.
It's amazing, isn't it, to contemplate what size of underground installation or building installation Wright-Patterson would have to have over the last 60 years to accommodate all of the craft that have been described by military and intelligence people as having been transferred there.
Oh, absolutely. And not only from my source of the young airman, he said it was a humongous building. But I also got verified from the interview with these civilians that it was multi-storied underground,
right,
and that they went by hallway or a railway under it, and then had elevators up and down to go to the various floors and to the top. So, yeah, I can only imagine how huge that facility is.
What do you personally think from a long 23-year Army military career about this government's policy of complete denial about extraterrestrial biological entities that they know very well about, but maintaining a policy of denial in the interest of national security?
I think they think they're protecting the American public because the comment, if the people knew what was going on, people would be jumping off of buildings.
Why?
Out of fear. There's three fears: fear of death, fear of the unknown, fear of change. All of which the validity of spacecraft and aliens in our environment would be all of those things create the fear of all three. Mm-hmm. And I think they think they're protecting the American public and the world by keeping it a secret.
I have confirmed that the length of the C-5A is almost 248 feet long, and its cargo compartment is 13.5 feet high by 19 feet wide. So that top-shaped or bell-shaped craft had to be smaller than 19 feet in diameter as something that was circular in order to fit in that cargo bay. And right now, at my news website, www.earthfiles.com, you can see the drawing of that top-shaped or bell-shaped UFO that is covered with these chopped-off jungle vines that Dwayne Britnell did for me based on his memory of the airman drawing on his table back in 1983 for Dwayne. Now, what is especially interesting, Whitley, is that military and intelligence sources over the years have told me that a top-shaped or bell-shaped craft is piloted by the blonde humanoids, referred to as Nordics or blondes, as opposed to the gray extraterrestrial biological entities or the other type that some people call reptoid.
Well, Linda, it is an amazing story indeed, and what's so frustrating about these stories is that we get these things, and we talk about a huge building out there at Wright Pat, and it seems like a gigantic secret world that so many people know about, but nobody ever really gives up, except in this, some guy retiring decides to give it up a little bit, but he has no documentation, no pictures, and it goes on like this. It's very frustrating. I'd like to see more, frankly, and if there is more.
Well, it underscores that our government is extremely effective in keeping what's called the hard physical evidence close to its chest, and that people never have the evidence that we want, the photographs, the craft, the entry into any of these places, because they'll lose their pension, they'll lose their jobs, and people become frustrated, as so many are right now. They're angry in many ways at this administration. Military people are, and they're saying, I know that extraterrestrials are real, but they can't provide for us those photographs and those craft and that access to those buildings at Wright Pat and Area 51 and on and on. But that, to me, does not take away from the fact that this story is based on real physical evidence. There have been too many military and intelligence people who have been face-to-face either with live entities or they have seen the dead entities being preserved in some places. And right now, it seems that we are beginning to get more and more glimpses of what people have known firsthand because they're frustrated today with a government that is lying and suppressing in an enormous way, and people now are saying at least the human family should know, yes, there are extraterrestrials and they come and go here. And I don't know if you're feeling that, but Linda, I certainly am getting that.
It be someone, the Anunnaki, someone who is actually here now among us and who is moving people like you through the world. Do you feel any sense of that at all?
I definitely feel a sense of guidance. I can't put a name or a face on it. I call it synchronicity, but I just feel that, I have to trust that I do have this sense of guidance and am being guided in a positive way that will ultimately lead to the revelation that I'm looking for. I, along the way, have encountered resistance. I mean, it's just to be expected. And the way that I interpret resistance is that, wow, I must be getting close. I must be on the right path, because otherwise, why would I be in some of these situations where all of a sudden, unexpectedly, people that you think are normal people under normal circumstances suddenly begin displaying utterly bizarre behavior that is meant to distract you and put you off your path. I mean, I can definitely say that goes on as well. So, to answer your question, yeah, I feel that sense of guidance and continue to try to just stay tuned to it and to follow it, because it is, to me, eminently positive.
There is a temple in Egypt, which I suspect that you've seen, where there are supposedly figures of modern technology painted on the rafters at the top of the temple. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with this?
You must be. I believe you're talking about the temple at Abydos.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Have you seen them?
Several times, yes, absolutely. It's one of my all-time favorite places in Egypt. Spent a lot of time studying Abydos.
What do you make of them? Describe them first, if you will, for those who are not familiar with this.
I believe that what you're talking about is the hieroglyphs that appear to form what look like Black Hawk helicopters,
and a Russian tank, and a Russian. Another type of big Russian helicopter, yeah.
Right. And there's two schools of thought on it. One, that it actually does portray this advanced technology. Another take that's been developed for several years now is that, in fact, that it's the superimposition of two hieroglyphs that appears to make that connection.
Egypt, the discovery that Teotihuacan in Mexico and Abu Garab in Egypt were similar places where, as Zechariah Sitchin put it, the Anunnaki may have been making gold of some sort. Both places are similarly laid out, and in Teotihuacan there is an extraordinary intact mass of silica that nobody really understands. William found silica in plates in Abu Garab that apparently nobody has ever found before. And I was thinking, William, do you believe that this material is beginning to appear because people like you are looking for it? Do you think that it's possible that maybe 50 or 100 years ago it couldn't have been found?
I think that's a very interesting perspective, Whitley, because as even von Daniken commented in his article in his magazine about that mica, it was unknown 100 years ago what the potential use for such a substance might be. And as he even notes, to suggest that primitive man knew what this stuff could be used for in terms of its superconductive capabilities, its use as an insulator in high-frequency applications and computer technology, it's absurd to think that they could have had that understanding, unless, as we have suggested so many times, the missing link is a super advanced race that constructed these places with complete knowledge of the use of this material.
And that locked these places with a certain kind of key that can only be unlocked by those who regain the knowledge that we have lost. And this gets me to sort of the first place I want to go right now, William, which is our shattered memory of the past. Folks, we're going to be talking more about things like Atlantis and the Atlantis connection to Abu Garab and the Atlantis connection to Egypt in general, but in ways you've never heard it talked about before, so do listen on. We're shattered, William, now. We're broken. We don't have everything that was great, it seems, is in ruins. So what happened?
Well, yeah, is this a cyclical cataclysm that periodically wipes out vast numbers of humans while harvesting a mindset? The Nile had a heavenly counterpart. There's a law attributed to Tahuti that says, as above, so below. And so when we see Proud Mary on her craft, she's not sailing down the earthly Nile, she's sailing along the heavenly Nile. And here's where this story gets really wild. I compare the shape of Proud Mary's craft, or her ship that she's sailing in, with the way modern science portrays a wormhole. In fact, I used Professor Stephen Hawking's drawing of a wormhole. And when I put his depiction of a mouth of the wormhole with the throat and then the second mouth beside Proud Mary's craft, you cannot tell the difference between the two drawings. And what I suggest with this is that perhaps the ancient Egyptians had this primordial sacred science, and what they are trying to tell us is that long ago, these beings sailed the stars in craft that we today call stargates or wormholes. And what we are now coming upon is awareness. We have finally developed enough of our capability, our mental capabilities, and indeed probably spiritual capabilities to comprehend what these stories are actually telling us. It's profound.
And it gets even more profound when you think about what Stephen Hawking is now saying about our relationship to the past. He is now saying that the past changes depending on how we look at it. In other words, it may be that the mica wasn't there, wouldn't have been there at all 50 years ago, literally not there, but is there now for you because of the way you are beginning to look at the past. You may be a wormhole, William. You may be one, literally, physically.
Yeah.
You and everybody else who's doing this and doing it right, like Stephen Mailer and Chris Dunn.
Sure, absolutely. I have stated numerous times that I believe that the human body, from the soul's perspective, is a resurrection machine. It is the particle accelerator that scientists say is required to open such a wormhole. And when we begin to look at it from that perspective, maybe that is one of the vibrational adjustments that we make in our spiritual as well as mental being that enables us to find ourselves in the company of other like-minded and like-souled people, like, as I discussed, a small segment. I mean, the Bible infers that that's a possibility. In fact, the Bible suggests that it's going to happen again, and we may even be living in a time, an end time, when that harvesting of souls transpires once again, and then perhaps there will be another cataclysm that wipes out or destroys our memory and leaves us ill-equipped to be able to understand what we're looking at when we're dealing with some of these temple sites and other of the artifacts of these previously glorious civilizations.
Because Egyptian religion can be read as ritualized motions, like a cargo cult of the kind that would appear in New Guinea when the American soldier Air Force would land during World War II. The natives, having no idea even what an airplane was, would see this and then would see these men bringing out all kinds of wonderful things from the airplane, and they would invent rituals. They would invent a ritual language connected with this activity. They would build their own runway. They would build bamboo and airplanes with wings made of leaves. They would build little bamboo refrigerators and make sounds and move around them like they saw the American soldiers doing, and open them in hopes that cans of beer would come out, or bottles, I guess, of beer in those days. Egyptian religion, with its highly structured, ritualized behavior, the wearing of all of these strangely shaped objects on the head and body, all of the movements, the temple, the structure of the temples, has the flavor of something like that, to me at least.
Oh, I totally agree. In fact, in my presentations, when I discuss this subject, and indeed in my second presentation while in Egypt, which I called Egyptian Stargate Metaphysics, the Dimension of the Blessed, I show these beautiful paintings of a woman. For the sake of giving her a name, I call her Proud Mary. And Proud Mary is on a craft or on a ship, and she's floating along a river. And to the uninitiated, it looks like, wow, she must be on her boat and she's sailing down the Nile. Not true. it turns out that in the Egyptian at St. Rain and Anya Nadell that can help us put together this piece to the puzzle that suddenly unlocks this amazing new avenue of inquiry and knowledge and affirms that, hey, this stuff is real. I mean, what Sitchin is talking about, here's where the rubber meets the road. This is one of the actual sites, and it's just incredibly exciting to be a part of this right now, and I can't wait to see where it goes, to be perfectly honest with you.
I once asked this gentleman who used to meditate with me, I refer to him more and more often lately because it's, I think, becoming more and more important to do so, who came with a number of others for quite a few years to my old cabin in upstate New York. What was the most important thing I could know? To which his response was, not in words, but this is what it meant. Live, hate, soul starves. Live, love, soul thrives. Essentially, this process is going on right now, and a decision is being made, I think, by many, many souls, and this has been true for some time, a kind of final decision about what they will do and be, and or not be, because I think that it isn't that the evil go to hell. I think it is that the evil just don't go. They just sort of disappear. I have a feeling that they kind of wither away and die and blow away like a sort of dust. Is that
sort of like a reverse rapture, in other words?
Yeah, well, there's going to be a rapture, all right, but the meek are going to turn out to inherit the earth, and of course, then they're going to have to roll up their sleeves and fix the darn thing, but that's fine. That'll be one of the greatest acts of love in the history of humanity.
There you go. Right,
yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly. To repair the past. Let's get back to the past a little bit, because the past does not anymore seem to be fixed. It's malleable. And I have a feeling that one of the reasons that it's being so carefully hidden from us is that someone does not want us to find a certain past. They want us to find the past that's most important to us of a whole vast array of pasts that we could find. How does that resonate with you? The idea that there might